Jeez. Did you hear that?
Yeah, was that thunder?
That was thunder, yeah. Holy shit. But yeah, the clouds don't even let me talk bad about Shaquille Leonard. Sorry, I think I said Darius Leonard, but yeah, dude, like even the sky.
That was actually Colts fans outside of your window saying, "How dare you talk trash about?"
Yeah. But just to finish my thought there.
Man. What is going on, everybody? Welcome in to the top 10 of my 2022 NFL Deep Dive Power Ranking Series, as today we're going to be taking a look at the Indianapolis Colts. This is a team that I think many people were not expecting to make it this high into the top 10, so I'm really looking forward to explaining what I like about this Colts team. We also will be joined by my good friend Zach Hicks of the Locked On Colts podcast. Really excited to share that interview with you guys. Make sure you stick around towards the end. You're not going to want to miss it. But before we do get started, if you could do me a huge favor, please do take a moment to hit that like button down below. A lot of time and effort goes into this series. It's really important to me that this series continues to do well. And by you hitting that like button down below, it is a free and easy way to really help me out in a big way. It really does matter, and I really appreciate you taking a second to hit that down below. Also, make sure you subscribe so you can join me on this quest to 100,000 subscribers here on YouTube, and you won't miss any of these team previews as we lead up to the number one team in my rankings. But let's go ahead and get started by recapping what was a really busy offseason for the Indianapolis Colts. A lot of turnover here, and as we look at this list of departures and additions, the departures outlist the additions here, but the Colts are hoping that the quality of their additions here is going to outweigh the quantity of their losses. And as we look at some of these names here, it's hard to really blame them for thinking that, and I think this team does have a good case to be made that they improved on paper this year. So it's going to start, though, with the staff, where they are losing Matt Eberflus, their defensive coordinator, going to take a head coach position with Da Bears, and they're going to replace him with Gus Bradley. And we'll be sure to talk about what that means for the coaching staff here momentarily. But from a roster perspective, as I mentioned, a long list of departures, some bigger than others, but listed as significant departures for me. Of course, Carson Wentz, their starting quarterback from last year, leaving, along with Mark Glowinski, starter on the offensive line, with Eric Fisher, Jack Doyle at tight end. You have, on the defensive side of the ball, Al-Qadim Mohammed, who ate up some dirty work up front for them, and three starting defensive backs, Rock Ya-Sin, Xavier Rhodes, and Khari Willis, who retires. Some smaller departures include Chris Reed, who stepped in as a backup for them but played well, T.Y. Hilton, who was definitely at the back end of his time in Indianapolis, Zach Pascal, really physical starting receiver for them last year, but not particularly productive. And then on the defense, Taylor Stallworth, a rotational defensive tackle who played pretty well in that role. Kemoko Turay, a former second-round pick who never reached his ceiling for this team on the edge. Andrew Sendejo, who ended up having a start at safety for this team with some of the injuries they had, along with George Odom, who played a role for them. So, a long list, but really nobody in there who you're terribly worried about. You know, the secondary losses are definitely notable, and Mark Glowinski is a good guard, but for the most part, you're losing starters that they pretty confidently think they can get better at those positions despite losing their starters. And some of those big additions that they hope to be those pieces obviously include Matt Ryan at quarterback, and then they get Alec Pierce in the second round of the draft, their first pick of April's draft out of Cincinnati. And then on the defensive side of the ball, on the edge, Yannick Ngakoue. Stephon Gilmore comes in, big name perimeter corner for them. They draft Nick Cross, who's going to be flushed into a starting role after the retirement of Khari Willis there. And alongside him, getting Julian Blackmon back from injury, hopefully. So definitely some big additions there at a lot of the positions that they lost players. And then some smaller additions for me include getting Paris Campbell back, hopefully healthy this year. That's a major if. They also, in the third round, add more pieces to the offense. Jelani Woods, a massive athletic tight end out of Virginia, and Bernard Raymond, an offensive lineman out of Central Michigan. And then on the defensive side of the ball, Brandon Faison's going to follow Gus Bradley here over from Las Vegas. They add Rodney McLeod to shore up that safety group a little bit, and Ifedi Odenigbo, veteran edge player there. So a very busy offseason. It's going to be a lot to go through when we get to the roster breakdown here. But before we go through position by position and talk about these groups, I want to talk about this coaching staff and what this team's going to look like schematically on both sides of the ball. And for anyone that looks at this 10th ranking for the Colts and says that's a little bit too high based on the roster talent, I get it, man, I do. But you just can't underestimate what a great coach and a great culture can do for a football team. And I really think the Colts are towards the top in the league as far as that conversation is concerned. I think Frank Reich is awesome. I rank him 9th among NFL head coaches. But if you were just talking about what he brings to the table from a leadership, tone-setting, culture-building perspective, I think it would be even higher than that 9th ranking. Whether it's being a relatable head coach with a unique leadership style that really appeals to these players, or whether it's establishing a next man up mentality for this team, that if you show up, you work, and you put in the right steps, you are going to earn an opportunity here no matter where you're drafted. And he has established a tough, anti-fragile culture here that seems to only get better the more adversity they face. And that's the highest of compliments you can give to a head coach. And they've done all that in an intelligent way, in a way that is, as was detailed in the All or Nothing series. This is a family, but they aren't soft. This is also one of the biggest FU physically minded teams in the league that, you know, they went in as underdogs and stomped the Bills and stomped the Cardinals, who weren't prepared for the physicality that this team can bring. So they have it all put together as far as earning the benefit of the doubt, being physical, giving us confidence that they are going to have these openings, be players that step up from that list of departures that we just saw. So that is, like I said, the highest of compliments we can give. And the beauty here is Frank Reich is not just a CEO type. This is someone who is an offensive guru. That all kind of started when he was in Philadelphia with Doug Peterson, and he lit up Bill Belichick in the Super Bowl, scoring 45 points with Nick Foles. Then gets the head coach offer that, a few weeks later, basically, and the Eagles fell off when he left. And the Colts have had 5 quarterbacks in as many years, and every year he's catered his offense to his quarterback, to his players. I think an offense that has, in general, overachieved and developed talent very well based on what it was when he got here. And it's not just from a pass game perspective, where he brings a lot of the modern pro spread influence from not just the Andy Reid scheme, but Ken Wisenhunt before that, where you get a lot of mesh, you get a lot of leveling concepts against zone. Really a scheme that is quarterback friendly and attacks the middle of the field, which is sort of the offensive meta right now, where everybody's trying to attack the middle of the field. So he does it well from a pass game perspective, but I was blown away with how impressive Frank Reich's run game was last year, where he comes from a scheme that's traditionally a lot of zone running. You look at, obviously, the Eagles when he was there with Doug Peterson, Andy Reid with the Chiefs, a lot of zone running. But he looked at his team and said, you know what? We're going to set the spread stuff aside, and we're going to go 12 personnel. We're going to bring in some of those Jim Caldwell, more old school influences here. We're going to go power, run, and be a little bit more pro style here. The Colts were almost exactly a third of their runs as gap runs last year, being power, trap. Like, you look at them against the Buffalo Bills, they just started running B-gap trap, which you don't see a whole lot of, like trapping a 3 technique and creating these gaping runs because they identified that as a scheme that would work well against the fronts they were seeing. So from a run game perspective and the coaching side of things, they are third in the league for me. I was blown away. Yes, they have a good offensive line, but yes, they have Jonathan Taylor, but they were a dominant run team, especially in the second half of last year, and I fully expect that to resume here. So again, a large reason for my optimism for this team is that man right there, Frank Reich, who I have the utmost respect for. But it's not just him. You got Marcus Brady, who is an extension of Frank Reich, and it's always difficult to separate the offensive coordinator from the head coach when the head coach is the offensive coordinator. But I do think Marcus Brady is an ascending offensive mind, someone that will be getting head coach interviews soon. We've already seen 2 coaches on this team go and be head coaches since Frank Reich took over with Nick Sirianni and now Matt Eberflus. So I think Marcus Brady could be next in line. Hell, maybe Gus Bradley even gets another look as a defensive coordinator, if as a head coach rather, if things go well for him on the defensive side of the ball here for the Colts. A nice transition as they rank 15th in the league for me. Now, they lose Matt Eberflus, who to me is one of the brilliant defensive minds in the league and well-qualified head coach hire for the Bears. It's not going to be easy to replace that, but I think they handled it about as well as they could have because Gus Bradley did a damn good job for the Raiders last year. I would say the Raiders overachieved defensively based on their roster talent. And he becomes available because they make a coaching staff change. So the Colts pluck him up, and it should be plug and go here with Gus Bradley, who I think is a really good coordinator in his own right. One of the legendary sort of names from the Legion of Boom defense. And that's really what he's known for. And unlike some of the other guys in that coaching tree, guys like Dan Quinn, for example, maybe Robert Saleh, those guys have gone off and kind of switched their coverages up a little bit. Dan Quinn's running cover 1 now. Robert Saleh, a lot of split safety looks. Gus Bradley's like, nope, I'm staying with what I know well. Single high, cover 3. And while it probably led to him flaming out in Jacksonville as the league caught up to that, he still communicates that scheme incredibly well. And while there are some times, if there's a knock on Gus Bradley, where you wish he wasn't so stubborn to that cover 3, because you saw times last year the Chiefs were like, oh, single high, every single snap, great. Deep crosses, thrown outside the number, you can't stop us. And they couldn't. So while there's some times Gus Bradley can be frustrating because of how stubborn he is to his cover 3, where the Raiders led the league in cover 3 last year by about 15%. It was a large gap between them and the number 2 team in terms of cover 3. While that's a thing, he's really freaking good at coaching cover 3. He really communicates the assignments of those different zone defenders and when you can take risks, where your key responsibilities are. He can really beat that into these players. And maybe even some existing influences from Matt Eberflus, which saw a lot of 2 high, a lot of cover 2, can sprinkle in a little bit more variety to Gus Bradley's zone calls that could actually make him an even better defensive coordinator. I wouldn't rule that out because you are going to have some existing influencers from this defensive staff. So I'm in general very optimistic about the Gus Bradley hiring. I will say the biggest thing he's going to bring to the table is the stunts that they're going to be able to put together up front. And This really stood out with the Raiders last year was how well they ran those cross stunts where you're either using the 3 technique to slant outside and occupy the tackle, which creates an open rush for the edge player, or vice versa. You can occupy the guard and the tackle with the edge guy if he's strong enough, if his get off is good enough, and if you have an athletic enough defensive tackle, you can actually wrap him around. So Bradley, I do believe, is one of the best stuntmans, if you will, as far as scheming those looks up, and that's something that was missing with Matt Eberflus. So this could be a dream match for the Colts and could even provide a scheme that gives them a higher upside for this year's defense, as much as I like Matt Eberflus. So that's a lot of time spent on the staff here, but this staff is a really integral part of why this Colts team is a top 10 team in the league for me. These guys do things the right way, and you cannot disregard the impact that coaching and scheme has on elevating a team's roster. But that said, it's not like this team's roster is bad. So let's get into it. We're going to rank each position group, how they stack up against the rest of the league, starting with the quarterback room, where they are now 14th in the league. I think Matt Ryan is a step up from Carson Wentz, and I do think he's the best quarterback they've had here since Andrew Luck surprisingly retired. He's close to what they had in Phillip Rivers in 2020, but a similar concept. And remember, that Colts team was really good with Phillip Rivers, but I think Matt Ryan has a little bit more overall juice to his game than what Phillip Rivers had. Rivers was incredibly tied to the system, and Matt Ryan is as well, but Rivers could not move. He could not really push the ball downfield, and Matt Ryan still can. Now, there's a stat going around that he's like 3rd in the league in deep ball accuracy. You got to be careful with those metrics because deep ball is counted as 20 plus yards, and Matt Ryan also was like only threw it when it was wide open. Like, he was really low as far as deep ball attempts, and those deep attempts were going about 25 yards. He wasn't pushing the ball 50 yards downfield like some of the best deep ball throwers in the league. So while you need to be careful with that stat, he will hit you down the sideline, deep over the middle, if it's there. And I think that's a little bit more of a factor than what they had in Phillip Rivers. I also think he moves much better in the pocket. I think his athleticism is as good as it's ever been for Matt Ryan, actually, who's sneakily athletic. He's not a great athlete, but he can move. He will pick up an 8-yard scramble for a first down if you go man coverage. So it's always been an aspect of his game that isn't great, but it's just enough for a quarterback that everyone considers a pocket passer to kind of hurt you in little ways. He's going to be a surgeon. He has one of the 3 or 4 best processors in the league, and I think he's going to be a great fit here. Schematically and for these players, it was a really nice move to go and get Matt Ryan, and I think they can win a Super Bowl with Matt Ryan. I think he's in that tier of quarterbacks, of good quarterbacks, not great quarterbacks, that need help, but with the right help, can be a quarterback that you win with. So 14th for me at quarterback. They have Nick Foles as the backup, trying to recreate some of that Frank Reich, Nick Foles magic. It's fun that he's here. He can obviously run the scheme and buy you a few wins, maybe get hot. He's a very streaky player. He's a very confident player. But those streaks of on the down arc are going to come with Nick Foles. So you got him, you got Ellinger and Cohn, some interesting young backups. It's a good quarterback room, ranking 14th in the league. The weapons are much more suspect, and this is one group that could potentially hold this team back. I think Matt Ryan can do enough with these guys that they can suffice as a solid passing game, and you have a certain amount of upside here. But there is a lack of explosiveness to this passing game as a whole, whether it's the quarterback there with Matt Ryan or the receivers, where you don't really have any true number ones or like real explosive deep threats or insane run after catch guys. What you do have is tough, big-bodied receivers for the most part. You have Michael Pittman, had an excellent year last year, surpassed 1,000 yards. Some Colts fans will be mad when I say he's not a number one receiver. I just mean I don't think he can be a talented enough player when it comes to separation ability, vertical explosiveness, to be the best receiver on an ideal receiving core. He is an X wide receiver. He will work the sidelines. He will be on the depth chart the number one, right? But I would much rather him be in the shoes of similar players like Mike Williams, hell, even Mike Evans for the Bucs, or T. Higgins. Very like-minded, like-bodied players that Michael Pittman has shown to be very similar to those guys as ball winners, as adequate route runners, as adequate athletes with a lot of size. But again, is, I think, a little bit maxed out at this point in his career. Then you have Alec Pierce, who I do think can be a little bit more explosive than Michael Pittman, someone with better speed and verticality, someone that I think, I'm not going to say Pittman is a bad route runner. He really is pretty good as far as foot speed and routes, but likewise, Alec Pierce can really release quickly and not just that, but has some sharpness in his short routes with room to grow in his overall route running. A really fluid, in general, great athlete that was a second-round pick for good reason. Reports have been good for him out of camp, and I expect him to, at some point here, live up to the call of being a number 2 wide receiver for this team and a nice player to have opposite of Michael Pittman. But when are you going to get that? It's hard to know exactly. So definitely a bit of a wild card there. What are you getting from Alec Pierce in his rookie season? And then an even bigger wild card is Paris Campbell going to finally stay healthy? No one's going to sit here and tell you Paris Campbell can't play. This guy was basically a first-round pick, super athletic dude, one of the better receivers in the league with the ball in his hands. He's very similar to me to what Deebo Samuel was as a young player, was drafted at a similar position, tested similarly, and is built similarly physically speaking. But just can't stay healthy all 3 years. It's been incredible, and you just can't count on him to stay healthy. Right now, seems to be healthy and doing well in camp. We just don't know how long that's going to last. So, if Pierce is good as a rookie and Campbell can stay healthy, this can actually be a pretty good receiving core. But those are two pretty big ifs, right? And you don't have a lot of depth to basically provide insurance to those things. You have Ashton Doolin, who's a deep threat, who's made some splash plays, but hasn't shown to be anything more than a rotational 4th or 5th wide receiver. Kiki Kuti can be this team's slot wide receiver if and when Campbell gets hurt. He's fine, but not reliable. And then some bigger-bodied guys on the perimeter, Desmond Patton, Strachan, Ford. I imagine one of those guys will make it. Could be decent backups to your Pittman and Pierce there. And then keep an eye, I guess, on DeMichael Harris. Just kind of disappeared last year, but a really small wide receiver that could play the Paris Campbell role, I think, if this team decides to trust him again. I'm not quite sure why he has disappeared. Maybe he was even hurt last year, but 2020 showed some flashes. But in general, not the most exciting depth with the wide receiver room, and you really hope Paris Campbell can stay healthy. They are towards the bottom as far as weaponry. It is going to be this team's biggest weakness. That said, there are some really fun pieces complementary to those guys in the short to intermediate game, and Matt Ryan uses these pieces really well. Backs out of the backfield, throwing to tight ends. So maybe more than other teams, you're going to really put an emphasis on tight end 1, tight end 2, who's catching the ball out of the backfield. So it's not all about these wide receivers here. You have Mo Alley-Cox, who's a big-bodied guy, someone that is going to be a red zone target for Matt Ryan, who cannot really scramble too well in the red zone, doesn't fit tight window throws. Matt Ryan is historically one of the worst red zone quarterbacks of all time because of his lack of physical tools. There's a reason Julio Jones and Kyle Pitts never scored touchdowns. But theoretically, Mo Alley-Cox is a good target for him in that area. If he gets stuck in a pinch, he can put it up to him. Third downs apply as well. They also have Kylan Granson, This team will run a ton of 12 personnel, especially if Paris Campbell can't stay healthy. So you're going to have 2 tight ends on the field, where Kylan Granson is half receiver, half tight end. Really fluid athlete, is really just a part of the scheme here. They use his speed and decent hands, decent run after catch ability from the wing to scheme him open. And he is someone you got to keep an eye on, who will pull away from linebackers and even safeties. So he's a weapon for this team, someone to keep an eye on. And then Jelani Woods was drafted in the 3rd round. I think most likely they see him as the Mo Alley Cox future replacement and someone with more upside than Cox. But as long as Cox is here, I think Jelani Woods is going to be in development. An incredibly raw tight end, but one of the freakier tight ends you'll see. Reminds me a lot of an old Martellus Bennett, was my pro comp for him. 6'7", 260 pounds, very stiff and looks clunky and awkward moving over the middle of the field, but tough dude with the ball in his hands. Not a terrible run blocker, and someone that has deceptive long speed as well to run up the seam. So someone with more upside than Mo Alley Cox. It's just someone that we don't know how quickly that's going to come. Andrew Ogletree has also been reportedly outplaying Jelani Woods in camp, another really athletic small school tight end they drafted. So they have a couple project types there to round out the tight end depth room. Then the running backs, it's an outstanding group. We'll talk about these guys as runners as well, but in the receiving game, you have to list them both. They will both play significant reps. Jonathan Taylor really took a step up in the receiving game. Just, he's such a gifted player that they can't entirely take him off the field on 3rd down. Screens, he even went down the field, caught some wheel routes, had some explosive routes. They'd line him up in the slot, run slants. Like, he embraced that part of the game in a way that I didn't even think was part of his college profile. So that's commendable. But you've got Nyheim Hines next to him, who's one of the probably 3 to 5 best receiving backs in the league, who seems to only be getting better. They gave him a contract extension, someone with legitimate route running ability, insanely explosive, both in his routes and after the catch, good hands. He's a real weapon here, and if they have Taylor out there, they're going to find another way to get Nyheim Hines out there, whether it's flexed out wide, in the slot, or in two running back sets. They're going to use both these guys heavily, and both I expect to have big years with Matt Ryan, even more than Carson Wentz, because Carson Wentz didn't always utilize those underneath receivers as a little bit more of a headhunter quarterback. Matt Ryan's not going to be afraid to just flip it out to Nyheim Hines on a swing pass on 3rd and 6. So those guys do help. Still 28th for weaponry, because there's a lot of really deep, really talented receiver groups in the league, but you can definitely see a path where Matt Ryan can utilize these guys' skill sets. Everyone will play their role, and this group at least won't hold them back from what they want to do. Not really any running back depth worth mentioning too much, by the way, because these guys are just going to get the full workload as they did last year. Verdell and Price were interesting UDFA pickups, but I'm going to gloss over those backup backs for time's sake. But let's move on to the offensive line, where from a run block perspective, they're top 5, but pass protection especially has some question marks, where they're 14th in the league. You have 3 rocks here, staples of this organization. Quentin Nelson, of course, the 2nd best guard in football, in my opinion, the best left guard, absolute mauler in the run game, a fan favorite because he's just everybody's favorite style of offensive lineman. He has that dickhead mentality. He's going to buy into every aspect of lining up and beating up the man in front of him for 60 minutes of football. So you love Quentin Nelson there. You got Ryan Kelly at center, who the last couple years has actually just been solid, not great. I think maybe some better footballs ahead of him. He's had some injuries. I know he had a baby last year. It can be a distraction, but still a really good center there at center, in the middle there. And then Braden Smith at right tackle, an incredible run blocker. Athleticism off the charts, has that mentality, plays with good pad level and grip strength and athleticism to get to spaces, you name it. But as a pass protector, some question marks. He doesn't have the longest arms. He just has been good in pass pro, but he's had some bad weeks in there against certain matchups. So he's not perfect. But really what this is about is you have two new starters here that we don't have a ton of information on, or at least a lot of footage of them playing NFL football. You have Matt Pryor at left tackle, who they actually paid $5.5 million to come back here and start at left tackle. Maybe a little bit overlooked. And it's a bit reminiscent for me of the Eagles when they paid Jordan Mailata. Now, they gave him more of a long-term extension. Pryor is not as good as Jordan Mailata, but a behemoth of a man who has put together good football in a small sample size. I think was the better tackle last year between him and Eric Fisher, but that's not saying a lot. Someone that just needs to prove in time that he can play as well as he has in those small sample sizes. But if he is the player that he's been in those 6 starts for the Colts last year, they have something at left tackle. But then you obviously have your kind of contingency plan, sort of hedging your bets, if you will, with Bernhard Raimann in the 3rd round. Really liked Raimann as a day 2 pick. I thought the first round buzz on him was always a little bit dramatic, considering he is a 25-year-old prospect and did not have very clean pass protection technique. I think that is probably what they're worried about with him. They're going to bring him along slowly as a backup here. He gave up inside moves quite a bit. His arm length is not ideal, just at 33 inches, and was susceptible to power as well. So if he's out there protecting Matt Ryan's blind side, you might certainly have some question marks. I think he's an awesome run blocker. I wouldn't have an ounce of a question mark about Raimann in run block, but I do think that is a big reason they're going with Pryor, who's more established in his technique as a pass protector. But there's your left tackle situation. Between those two, with this team's kind of benefit of the doubt that they've earned at this offensive line position, I'm not going to lie, I'm not really worried about it. Like, I think they're going to get a pretty good left tackle, whether it's Pryor or Bernhard Raimann. I think they're both solid investments. And then at right guard, I'm also not worried. It's just we can't rank Danny Pinter that high after he's only started like 4 games. But he stepped in and played really well with some injuries last year. He got some starts at center and really was moving guys in the run game. I think it was that Arizona game where they were missing Quentin Nelson and Ryan Kelly, I want to say, and they still came out and ran the rock, and Pinter was snapping the ball and playing really well. So, again, a smaller sample size, but someone that this team drafted in the 5th round with a ton of athleticism, a tough dude on the field, needs to improve as a pass protector, though, where he did get beat when he was in there. So that's the major, biggest concern for this offensive line is Danny Pinter's pass protection, but he's got some good pieces around him to shelter some of that on the inside. So those are really the 6 offensive linemen that are going to be in play here, as we talked about Bernhard Raimann. But, Dennis Kelly's a really solid swingman as a backup tackle, been for Tennessee, Green Bay. If Matt Pryor and Bernhard Raimann suck, you can put Dennis Kelly in there, and it's not a complete liability. He's a replacement level piece. Then you have Will Fries, Jason Spriggs, just kind of moderate guard depth there, and that's probably who all is going to be making the team here. Not a whole lot, in my opinion, with the rest of these guys that we at least know anything about, but they do have a good eye, so any of these guys could surprise. But yeah, it's a good offensive line, going to be much better from a run block perspective than a pass block perspective, but I still think can have a good pass block unit, all that said. As far as the contributions from the skill players, Mo Alley-Cox is a very, very good run blocker, so you've got him in there as your Y. Kylan Granson, not a great run blocker, but he's more of the wing player, so they'll protect him as a run blocker in the ways that they use him. Jelani Woods needs to improve his technique, but a big-bodied dude who isn't a complete disaster as a run blocker. You got a couple big-bodied receivers there as well, so pretty solid contributions as far as what they're getting on the perimeter from these guys. And then you got the running backs, ranking 1st in the league. I think I spoiled this in the Titans deep dive, but I right now have Jonathan Taylor as the best running back in the NFL. with Derrick Henry second right behind him. What he did was special last year. He was in the conversation for not just Offensive Player of the Year, but some people were throwing his name out for MVP. And, as far as running backs winning MVP, I think that ship has sailed, but he had a really good case for it if you believe a running back could win MVP. Because, like I said, it wasn't just what it is a runner. It was the contributions in the receiving game that came on. And he embodied this team's offense. It was very similar to when Adrian Peterson won it. Like, every week, it felt like not only was he churning out tough yardage, getting 100 yards every week, but when he got those well-blocked runs, and it was just one-on-one with him and a safety or him and a linebacker, he was making that guy miss more often than not. And then you aren't catching Jonathan Taylor, who has legit 4.4 speed to peel away on the back end. So he's got foot speed to change lanes and make guys miss in the hole. He has 225 plus pounds to his name to run through you and fight for tough yardage. I love his vision. Really can show the patience on zone when he needs to. Acceleration into the hole. Totally there for power or zone. He has the entire package, even more so than I would have said about Derrick Henry, even though Derrick Henry does it in such a unique way because he's just so big. But again, number one in the league for me, Jonathan Taylor, expecting, if not the same, an even better year this year from JT. And then kind of the perfect complement to him, because he's going to be your bell cow. As long as he's healthy, you're not really worried about who else is your running back. But Nyheim Hines provides that thunder and lightning, that change of pace back, whatever you want to call it. He is the best true scat back in the league right now. Someone that doesn't have a lot of size, isn't going to run through you, but line him up from the shotgun, 3rd and 4, you can give him the ball, and he'll find a way to get the first down. He also can create explosive runs on jet sweeps and outside zone and some of the gap stuff that they do. So he is functional as a runner. He has evolved that part of his game and is the perfect complement to Jonathan Taylor. If anything did happen to JT, that's when you're looking at sharing the workload a little bit more. We'll see if Philip Lindsay even makes the team. He's really still living off of that big couple of years in Denver, big rookie season. But Deion Jackson, a really good athlete in year 2 out of Duke, a little bit more size there. Tyson Williams had a good start for Baltimore last year. And these undrafted pickups, CJ Verdell, kind of a contact balance, undersized back. Think Devin Singletary, light kind of, and Devontae Price, a lot of speed and athletic upside, but didn't love his tape all that much. So it's a deep running back room, but you're really not going to have to see a lot of these guys as long as this group stays healthy. QB run multiplier is a 0 from Matt Ryan there. Pretty self-explanatory. But this does, for me, give them the 3rd ranked run game in the league. We also had the 18th ranked passing game here. Overall, churning out the 15th best offense. I hope you guys enjoy the new graphics here, painting a little bit of a better picture of where the strengths, where the weaknesses are for this team. But I see this as a very solid, call it middle of the road offense that I just think is going to be very consistent with the week in, week out consistency that you should get from Matt Ryan, the coaching staff that's going to put together a good game plan, and enough weapons to spread the ball around, find matchups, run the ball well. There is just that missing element of explosion in your quarterback and in your receivers that do make it pretty much impossible for me to see this being a top 10 offense, because I don't think you're going to get a lot of those big 30-plus point weeks. I don't think you're going to see this team winning a lot of games when their defense isn't on and winning shootouts. But I do think it's going to be a really good offense that provides week in, week out solid play. But now onto the defensive side of the ball. Let's start with the defensive line, where for me they're 13th for pass rush and 8th for D-line run defense, so a little bit better against the run, but just a very good, well-balanced front here. On the edge, they get Yannick Ngakoue, kind of a speed rusher extraordinaire, ton of juice and bend off the edge. He's got some moves he'll mix in, whether it's a cross chop, a spin move, and yeah, just a very good number 2 rusher. That's really what he's been since he came into the league. The ship has sailed at this point. I'm counting on him to be a number 1. But he, to me, is better than anything they had last year, and I like the move to go out and get him. This was a piece that they needed, and obviously someone that Gus Bradley's well familiar with. So a nice addition there. And then Kwity Paye on the other side had a good rookie season, really got better as the year went on, and I think that'll continue into year 2. We are actually going to talk a lot about Kwity Paye with Zach Hicks in that interview, but just a little bit of a teaser. His skill set is perfect for the many cross stunts that I mentioned earlier in the video that Gus Bradley runs, because he's got like a 6'5" 3-cone or something crazy, and he has it at like 260 pounds. So he's got quickness, get off, and size. And when you talk about cross stunts, being able to change lanes quickly, and you either need to shoot a gap, basically step up, step backwards, effectively run a 3-cone drill, get to a different gap, and bend and accelerate through that hole. It's basically a 3-cone drill. Or fire off the ball, occupy the guard, and let an interior guy wrap behind you. Perfect skill set there. So his production could be crazy. Maybe not quite what Max Crosby did for the Raiders, but schemed up in very similar ways there. So excited to see what Gus Bradley does with him and with DeForest Buckner next to him, who is an athletic specimen, and Dayo Odeyingbo, who's going to be an interior rusher here as well. Both have the speed and athleticism to either be that occupy man for those cross stunts or get up and bend and be quick around the edge. So much flexibility. Obviously, Yannick can do that stuff as well. You're going to see a million cross stunts, and they have almost a dream personnel to run this, both with the interior and the edge. But a little bit more on Buckner. He's not going to be just a stunt man. He's one of the 5 best interior rushers in the league. In 2020, I want to say he was the second most productive. Kind of was looking to maybe pass Chris Jones as that number 2 interior guy. Took a little bit of a step back last year. Was dealing with some injuries. I still think the world of DeForest Buckner. A little bit of I don't want to say oversized. He's really tall. So some linemen can really get up and under him. He really wins when he's at his best with his quickness, his swim move with these crazy long arms, and the ability to kind of sidestep and swim over guys. That's his go-to move. But he has some power in there with that size, with that length, just a little bit more matchup dependent as far as the power goes, because some guys can get up and under him because he's 6'7" playing on the interior. It's just kind of difficult. And that's why sometimes they will put him out on the edge, and he looks okay. But yeah, Buckner's a really good player. Run defense, some of that height stuff applies as well. He basically defends the run like he does as a rusher. He's very upright, leans on quickness and penetration, but not a true space eater or gap discipline guy. That's more Grover Stewart's role as that nose tackle, a run defending specialist who just, there's only so much he can do as a pass rusher because he's just not the most incredible athlete at 330 pounds or whatever he carries, but he's more functional than most true nose tackles as a rusher. It's to the point where with these other guys out there, you can keep them out there on 3rd and 6, and if they run, they're not going anywhere. And he can kind of be persistent, and he has a little bit of foot speed to maybe get after the quarterback. Had 22 pressures last year, which is pretty good for a nose tackle, but you're not counting on him to be a rush guy. That's why in more true rush package situations, you're going to see Dayo Odeyingbo effectively as a starting rush defensive tackle for them. 3-tech, 4-eye for their wide 9 packages. And we kind of alluded to what he's going to bring with his athleticism. Still in the project stages of his career. I wasn't a big fan of him as a 2nd-round pick, but I can totally see where he fits into the picture here. He'll play a little bit of early down edge as well as a run defender because Yannick is going to be taken off the field in a lot of early down situations because he's a horrid run defender. Odiengbo off the edge is really big and will play his role there, similar to kind of what Al-Qadim Muhammad did for this team. But he's going to be in the picture here, someone that I think is going to be ascending. And I think it's a good example of me not just sticking to my draft takes. As with any player, if you go to the right spot, you're utilized in the right spot with the right coaching, and you have the athletic tools of someone like Dayo Odeyingbo has, I think he can become a quality player. And very similar to what this team once had in Danico Autry from a physical perspective. So that's kind of the projection for Dayo Odeyingbo is Danico Autry, who Colts fans are familiar with, was here a couple years ago. But then you also got to talk about Tyquan Lewis, who's definitely going to play an early down role. And even more so than Dayo, I think, is going to help in run defense, where Ngakoue is a liability for your front on early downs. He's only 245 pounds. I think he saves a little bit of juice for those pass rush situations, and he just doesn't have the tools to defend the run. It's a part of why he fell in the draft, and he never has been able to do that at the next level. So this is a smart team. They will supplement that with one of the better kind of rotational, bigger-bodied run defending edge players in Tyquan Lewis. Was really good at it last year, might only be getting better. He's a key piece here. I think he could be even better than what they had in Al-Qadim Muhammad, because I think Lewis has a little bit more get off and length to be an adequate pass rusher when they do pass in those early down situations. So to me, you're really 6 deep there on the defensive line. You still have Ben Bonagu, who was a second-round pick, hasn't really shown much as far as his development goes, but the tools are there. Technically, Odenigbo is a solid veteran here as well, so you could say 6 deep, but limited opportunities for him as long as Dayo and Tyquan Lewis are doing their thing. I will say the interior defensive line really needs these unproven guys to step up. They spent a 5th-round pick on Eric Johnson, really good athlete out of a small school. We don't know a ton about what he's going to do. I like RJ McIntosh. Keep an eye on him. Liked him coming out of Miami. Kind of a good balanced defensive tackle. I think they may have found something there. Could be their replacement to Taylor Stallworth, who was pretty good as that 3rd D tackle for them last year. They're going to need to fill that spot. They draft Curtis Brooks in the 6th round. Chris Williams played some snaps for them. Byron Cowart got cut from New England. They pick him up. Someone here is going to have to come in and eat a good 250, 300 snaps and play pretty well on the inside. It's not a dire need, but it is a question mark for this front. But in general, I see this D-line as a strength of this defense. I think this pass rush can be a really productive group when you factor in Gus Bradley's stunting ability up front. You get some steps from guys like Dayo and Kwity Paye. This can be a top 10 group. And they're really good against the run as well, with Grover Stewart, one of the better nose tackles in the league. They will shelter Yannick Ngakoue with guys like Tyquan Lewis and Dayo. The only question is going to be those kind of rotational defensive tackles for run defense. But if it's 3rd and 1 and they got their starters out there with Lewis subbed in for Yannick, they're going to be shutting down this run. And they got a pretty freaking good group of linebackers here to help them with that too. They rank 3rd for linebacker run defense. So you're starting to see this is going to be a pretty high-ranking run defense. Shaquille Leonard now, formerly Darius Leonard, really took a step up last year as a run defender. I felt like his play diagnostics have reached that elite level. He's not the fastest guy. He's not the biggest guy either. He plays, I think, at about 220 pounds. And sometimes he will get, matched up with a guard and he'll get taken out of the play. But for the most part, he has wicked long arms, is super good at shedding blocks. His reach and just tackling consistency is incredible. He, to me alone, has made me realize the value of arm length for linebackers. 34.5-inch arms. That'd be really good length for an edge rusher. And it does so much for him. It a lot of those things I described, block shedding, ability to wrap up and be a secure tackler. But above all of that, I believe his unique ability to force fumbles that about a year ago I thought was a fluke and would be unsustainable. I am now willing to admit that that's just a part of his game now. I think he might retire potentially having forced more fumbles than maybe anybody ever. I mean, if he forces 6 a year, I want to say that'll get him on pace. Most of the leaders are pass rushers, too. The other tackle guy that did it was Charles Tillman with the peanut punch. Forced 44 fumbles in his career. I think Shaq Leonard, going to take some getting used to here. He could get there, and that's obviously amazing. That'll lead to a Hall of Fame career for him. So I've kind of woken up on the value he brings with that. But that arm length is such a big part of it because he's super instinctive. He's had the work ethic to work on boxing and pinpointing that ball to really punch it out. But it gives him the length to come in from weird angles and, get that thing. Those 2.5, 3 inches can make a big difference. But it also allows him to stay a secure tackler while he does it. Because while one arm's coming in for the punch, he's got this pterodactyl arm ready to come in kind of like this. So he's perfected the technique. It's a truly unique skill set that he has. And yeah, so he's not the best cover linebacker. He's not the best athlete in the world. He doesn't have this incredible sideline to sideline speed. But you pair IQ, tenacity, instincts, secure tackling ability with that peanut punch, I'm there. I think Darius Leonard's well worth the money they pay him, which I would not have said so about a year ago. And he's one of the 4 best linebackers in the league. So they have him there as an impact for the run defense. And then Bobby Okereke, he came out last year, said it's Okereke, not Okereke. Shaq Leonard changed his name. I can't wait to hear what Zaire Franklin wants to do with his name next. But anyway, well-balanced dude, smart guy, good athlete, true jack of all trades, master of none. Hasn't taken the steps you maybe were hoping he could have. What was really commendable, though, was when Leonard was hurt last year with that ankle. He missed a game. Okereke stepped in as the Mike and really was the captain of that defense and had his best game of the year. So maybe there's more with him, but if nothing else, you've got a really good number 2. That provides a little bit more size to the table there that Leonard doesn't. Zaire Franklin's definitely someone you got to keep an eye on as well. He's not going to be a full-time starter, but I do list 3 guys up there because Gus Bradley did run some base packages with KJ Wright last year. Zaire Franklin can play that role, kind of that strong side, Sam backer, even mugged up on the line of scrimmage sometimes. Someone that every time he's gotten an opportunity has played really well. Run defense. He hasn't even shown to be a liability in coverage. Just limited reps because he's had these guys ahead of him. But a captain on this team, someone that's been a focal point of their special teams. And if given the opportunity here, wouldn't be surprised if he became a surprisingly good starter for this team, having waited his turn. So they have 3 solid linebackers there. A notable lack of depth, EJ Speed's coming up through special teams, punt block specialist last year, and someone they really like JoJo Doman as an undrafted pickup, kind of someone that played that wing safety linebacker hybrid spot, really good athlete, good instincts. I think will make this team and someone you got to keep an eye on as a potential starter for this team, honestly, down the road. Sterling Weatherford, another prospect type, with some upside, another former safety. So they kind of thrown a couple darts at a couple of those wing safety linebacker hybrids. But in general, not the deepest group of linebackers, but a damn good one. For me, they rank 3rd in run defense, 9th in coverage, and a strength of this defense right there in the middle of the field. Then you get to the secondary. A lot of question marks here. They actually rank 25th for me for DB coverage. I think, at least for this defense, if something's going to hold them back, it's going to be this group. But I will say there's some stars in this secondary, and there is a lot of potential for this to be, I would even go as far as saying maybe top 12, top 15. I don't know if I'd go quite as far as top 10 potential, but there's some question marks here that if they land on the right side of the coin, you're going to have a really good group here, actually. So you've got Stephon Gilmore, who I'm not really worried about. It was really weird what Carolina did with him. They traded for him and then didn't really use him. He was like a 4th corner for them, started some games, rotated others. I didn't really get it, but he was he was really good everywhere they played him, whether it was in the slot or outside. It didn't matter. He looked like the old Stephon Gilmore. So based on that, he earns a significant 2-year contract here. And I don't think he's, former defensive player of the year, best corner in the league, Stephon Gilmore, but he's damn better than anything they had last year. So I like bringing him in as your CB1. You got Kenny Moore in the slot, premium slot corners, a premium slot corner. I would say the best slot corner in the game right now. Incredibly heady zone cover player. So for the cover 3 here, he's going to be just fine playing that curl flat. A lot of the time, he can go match and carry the seam for sure. Where he does get beat is when he's asked to follow crossing routes and slants and show off the long speed. That's not the best for him. But short areas, he's locked down and an excellent run defender from that slot position as well. So a couple of stars that you shouldn't have to worry about there to help compensate for an opposite corner spot that you definitely are going to look at as a major question mark for this team as a whole. Brandon Faison is following Gus Bradley over from the Raiders. If Gus Bradley likes anything, it's massive, long speed corners. And Faison is that, not a whole lot more. Someone that did show off that length and speed to get a decent amount of pass breakups and ball production last year, and he wasn't a full-time starter, but when he was asked to play, he was beat multiple times a game. Just the coverage is not very tight, the route anticipation, the zone instincts. I'm not a big fan of him, but it looks like he's going to be their day one starter. I do think they have 2 players that could potentially, in time, overtake him and be not just an adequate player, but a potential strength. So you have Isaiah Rodgers, who, by the way, might still be the starter. Right now, they're in a big rotation, and they will rotate them. It's not going to be Faison every drive. I think it'll be 2 drives for Faison, 1 for Rodgers. And as long as Rodgers plays well in this scheme, which I think he will, it's going to be really hard for them to not turn to Isaiah Rodgers. So I think it's only a matter of time, and I like Isaiah Rodgers. He's shorter. He's really slender, 175 pounds. They might ask these guys to press a little bit more, and that might not be something Rodgers is particularly comfortable with. So scheme fit, there could be an issue there with Isaiah Rodgers, but you can just go off with him. And when I say that, I mean off coverage. You don't have to press him. You can play him maybe 5 yards off and let him, use that space to his advantage, because his speed, his acceleration, just his general athleticism is impeccable. And he showed good zone feel last year, so I do think he can run cover 3. Just don't ask him to go press man on the outside all the time, because that's not really a skill set. So they might have to work around it, but I think he can play, and if they do it well, he can be a solid number 2 corner. Showed a lot of flashes last year. And then you also have Marvell Tell, who hasn't played for 2 years, but in his rookie year in 2019 shows some nice flashes, and he definitely fits that profile that Gus Bradley likes. Length, speed, size on the outside. So if he's healthy, I would not rule him out from being a surprise this year. You got 3 options. It's another team that has earned benefit of the doubt over the years, and yeah, you might have some bumps and learning curves there, but I think by year's end, you're probably going to end up with a pretty good number 2 corner between Rodgers and Marvell Tell, as long as this group is smart about it. But it does look like Faison's going to be the week 1 starter. You got some special teams types with speed, Tony Brown, Chris Wilcox, among some other guys competing for roster spots, but it's really about Rodgers, Tell, and Faison for those other corners. Then you get to the safety group, and while I can't rank these guys terribly high, I like this group, and I think they'll be just fine. You have Julian Blackmon, who I really like, has shown a lot of big playmaking ability as that rangy free safety. He's going to be at home running a ton of cover 3 here. I think he's going to have his best year and emerge as a not just starting caliber safety, because he's kind of been that, but emerge as a face of this defense, someone who could have a breakout year coming off the injury. But that's the thing, he's got to stay healthy. Was injured coming out of college, fell into the 3rd round, and then gets injured again last year. So he's got to be able to stay healthy. He's got to be able to get back full speed from that injury. But I really like him and have big expectations for him. And then Nick Cross kind of flushed into action maybe a little bit earlier than the Colts were hoping. They trade up for him in the 3rd round, an incredible athlete. And that term does get thrown around a lot, but it truly does apply to Nick Cross. Eerily familiar to me as a prospect to what Jeremy Chinn was for the Panthers. Maybe a little bit more raw as far as his tape, but similar unknowns because Jeremy Chinn was coming from a low level of competition. Nick Cross is only 20 years old and wasn't asked to do a whole lot for Maryland's defense. It's kind of like what's under the box with him. When asked to do more, what all can he handle? Blitzing, running more hook zone, buzz zone stuff, which I think in this defense he will play that Jonathan Abram role as more of a guy that's around the line of scrimmage a lot more, get to show some of those instincts. Really excited to see him get out there. A rookie that is going to be one of the more exciting players to see what he has to offer. Upside is through the roof with him, but just has to show what he can do, really. Someone that, his tape for Maryland was just kind of meh, honestly. But that was mostly because they were just asking him to drop into cover 2 most of the time. And it's just, there's not only so much you can do as a deep safety. So excited to see him. They bring in Rodney McLeod as well, who's excellent depth if Julian Blackmon cannot stay healthy. Sound veteran cover safety, can play a cover 3 shell if you want him to. But I do think they'll bring him in as a dime back as well. And you'll have maybe Nick Cross down there covering tight ends. Maybe you go McLeod in a hook zone or, do a little bit of the split safety stuff, go quarters with him in those more lighter dime packages. I think we see him whether or not Blackmon is healthy or not. So that's really the group there for the safeties. They bring in Rodney Thomas in the 7th round, Armani Watts from Kansas City, Will Redmond, backup types, a couple of undrafted free agents. It's not the deepest group, but it's a group that I think has upside in their own right, and a group that I think will definitely end the year higher than I'm currently grading these guys out. I just can't give them too high marks coming into the year, but that rounds out your secondary. Starting 25th overall, a group that I think as the year goes on, we see them more as a top half secondary in the league who came together as the year went on and answered a lot of these questions that we're currently talking about. From a run defense perspective, they're solid. You got Kenny Moore. They're in the slot. Love what you have there. We'll see what Nick Cross can do as kind of their strong safety. If he's really good, they're going to have really good support against the run, but a role that he might not be comfortable with right away. So the defense as a whole comes out 13th overall, 5th for run defense. Not a big surprise. They're really high there. Great D-line against the run. Darius Leonard, one of the best run defending linebackers. You got Kenny Moore in the slot. And then 19th for pass defense. A lot more upside than that, but just a lot of moving pieces here, right? And a lot of question marks. And it's one of the defenses that I'm most excited to see it all kind of come together this year. I think there's an immense amount of potential for this group, but some very legitimate question marks as well. So that combines to give you the 10th overall team. Special teams is great here as well. You got a good kicking game. Blankenship, really accurate. Not the biggest boot, but an accurate kicker. Good punter. Really good special teams unit. Guys like EJ Speed. You're going to get potentially some good kick returning from like Nyheim Hines, Paris Campbell. Isaiah Rodgers can get in the mix there. She was a really good returner last year. So across the board, really good special teams. And a team overall that I think is just gives you a nice baseline of good because of the players and the culture that they have. But if you've got a week in, week out stable offense and a defense that can be borderline top 10 with some really explosive elements to that defense now, like you can definitely see where this team ends up as a legitimate playoff team and a team that kind of similar to what the Bengals were last year. Like if the right things happen, maybe Super Bowl is in play. They're just a team that's going to kind of ride the line, try to avoid variance, and make the other team beat you and not make mistakes, and a team that capitalizes on mistakes really well. It's a formula that's worked for them and a formula I expect to continue working. So as we revisit the strengths and weaknesses for this team one more time, before we look at the schedule and what my win projections are for the Colts, their strengths to me is that culture we just described. They're an ass-kicking culture as well. When they face squishier teams, which there are definitely some squishy teams in the league with the direction that the league is going, look no further than what they did to Buffalo and to Arizona last year. They will take advantage of weak fronts and dominate you. They put up like 45 on the Bills and slaughtered them last year. So they've got that playing into their game, and that pairs with an elite run game. Then you also, I think, have an excellent front seven on the defensive side of the ball that's going to be a headache and an explosive nuisance for opposing offenses. As far as your weaknesses go, it's the explosiveness with the passing game, whether it's Matt Ryan or the playmakers. You don't have really that high-end vertical element to this offense. You got a little bit more to it than you maybe did with, say, Phillip Rivers in 2020 for this team, but you still probably aren't getting in a shootout with the Chiefs or the Bills or the Chargers and expecting to go punch for punch. You're going to want to keep it a little bit tighter to the belt, muddy the game up, play physical, take care of the ball, as opposed to getting in shootouts with those teams. You also have some question marks in pass protection that is also going to limit the verticality of this offense, and question marks in the secondary that you hope can be patched up as the year goes on and you don't get exposed and put into those shootouts that I don't think they can handle. So a team that I think we have a pretty clear picture of who they're going to be. Now it's about them going out and executing. Their schedule is not terribly difficult. Their Vegas over-under is 9.5, and I have them over that at just under 10 wins, 9.9 wins based on the projection. You love that you get a nice start. You have Houston and Jacksonville, week 1, week 2. They are on the road, but you can go on the road 2 games in a row, start 2-0 against my 32nd and 31st ranked teams before they're able to kind of put things together and get better as the year goes on. You know, I think Jacksonville especially is a team that you'd rather get week 2 and week 6 as they have here than week 15 and week 17 as they all come together with a new coach and Trevor Lawrence in year 2. So that's a big advantage. That said, they are in the AFC West. You got to play that gauntlet. You got the Chiefs, Raiders, Chargers, and Broncos. So, you know, how they handle those games, like if they can win one of those, I think they're in pretty good shape. But those are far from givens. Overall, I think this is a pretty manageable schedule. You get to end the year as well with the Giants and the Texans. If those are must-win games, I think they're going to be in a position maybe to make up a game in a tough AFC at the end of the year. So I see them as a 10, maybe 11-win team for the regular season. I do like the over. It doesn't pay great, so it's not like my favorite over-under bet of the year. I still like the Eagles under, the Saints over, and the Lions over better, even the Dolphins under. But this is up there for one of my top over-under bets, one that I'm willing to make myself. So I will go over, and I don't think they win the Super Bowl this year. The AFC is just too tough. It is certainly possible. I think they'll get in. They'll probably have a home game, so it's possible. I have them in the Super Bowl potential tier, but not a bet I'd be making. So that is everything on my end. We are now going to roll an awesome interview with Zach Hicks. And now I'm thrilled to welcome into the deep dive my good buddy Zach Hicks, now doing the co-host for Locked On Colts, and definitely someone that's really tuned into Indianapolis and what's going on. So excited to have a little chat here. Thanks for coming on, Zach, and how you doing?
I'm doing pretty good, man. No, it's a pleasure to come back on the show after last year's. You know, I feel like I was kind of reserved last year in my expectations for that team, and it kind of turned out the way that I was saying it last year. I felt pretty good about that.
Yeah, we recorded it during that weird time, I think, when Wentz was just kind of getting hurt. Mm-hmm. And it's like, is he going to miss half the season? Is he going to be ready for week 1? So that was definitely weird expectations going in. And things turned out pretty well up until week 18. And then everything fell off a cliff.
Yeah. Yeah.
Um, so my first question for you is, as someone that's probably spent a lot of time reviewing last year's season, has anything kind of popped or stood out to you after a second look, kind of with hindsight, whether it's a player that really impressed you or something the Colts did schematically, just anything that's kind of came to you over the last few months?
Yeah, I don't think it was anything like that like new popped out to me, but I think just from rewatching all that film and seeing kind of what went wrong and what kind of worked for that team, you could see the issues. You could see that that was a team that yes, they could come out and they could beat the Bills by 30 points. They could just smack the Bills and look like one of the best teams in football. But you could see where they would run into issues, even if they didn't have that Week 18 collapse. You could see where they would have really run into issues in the playoffs. I mean, obviously the number one thing was just the volatility at quarterback. They had that all season. Carson Wentz had his great games, he had his awful games, and unfortunately, those last 4 games of the year, he went into a really awful stretch, and that's kind of what sunk them, especially in those last 2 games that they needed to win. Uh, but it's not just Carson Wentz. It's easy to just place the blame on him because he's not here. The defense had a lot of issues as well. They couldn't get off the field in the fourth quarter. They had no pass rush for majority of the season, and it really wasn't the pass rushers that were terrible. It's just that scheme and the players in that scheme just did not fit whatsoever when it came to generating a pass rush, and that's what led to Lamar Jackson. I think in the second half against them had like 2 incomplete passes and like 400 yards passing in that like week 6 game. Like it was,
That's right.
yeah, it was
I
absolutely
totally
insane.
forgot about that game.
No, it's funny going back
Yeah.
and watching film for like all these film rooms and stuff. I keep forgetting that they played the Ravens last year. I don't know if I'm just blocking it out or or what, but I'm like, oh
Mm-hmm.
yeah, they did play the Ravens, but they had issues like that, and then not to just keep placing blame on guys who aren't here anymore, but at left tackle, Eric Fisher was an absolute train wreck last season, like terrible, terrible in pass protection. And when you see like these Washington Commanders fans being like, "Oh yeah, Indy's O line was terrible," I'm like, it wasn't great, but they had one awful, awful player who's not here anymore. So, I feel like the
Mm-hmm.
Colts going into this season, they have rectified a lot of those issues, and they brought in Matt Ryan to replace the volatility at quarterback. They bring in Gus Bradley, who yes, he has his issues, but he's gonna at least generate a pass rush, even if it's not by blitzing. These guys are going to be able to get after the quarterback. And then left tackle, it's Matt Pryor and Bernard Ryman. Those are some guys who, Pryor played pretty well last year. So, basically when I rewatch the film, I see a lot of what sank this team a year ago. But nothing like particularly is like crazy. It's like, okay, these are issues that we kind of saw happening throughout the year. And just rewatching it kind of solidified a lot of those issues for me.
Yeah. Gotcha. Well, you hinted at Bradley coming in a little bit. I want to talk about like what I was thinking of was, you have this great defensive coordinator in Eberflus leaving, and it made me think of Staley, who left the Rams, and then they bring in not Raheem Mostert, Raheem Morris,
Yeah.
and he just kind of assumed. Yeah, I don't think Raheem Mostert's calling plays anytime soon. He just kind of assumed the scheme and adjusted his game to what was already existing. Do you see that happening here, or do you think Gus Bradley's coming in and he's like, nope, we're going to double the amount of cover 3 we're running and do exactly what I did for the Raiders?
I think it's going to be the Gus Bradley type of defense. I think that there are going to be some things that he takes from Eberflus's scheme, because Eberflus, for all of his issues, for having a defense that would sit back a little too much, for having a defense that could never really generate a pass rush, even when he had some talent up front, he was a really good defensive coordinator, and there's a reason why he's a head coach now in Chicago. Like he was a really good defensive coordinator, but I think his scheme was kind of growing a little stale here in Indy. It was just they weren't really able, like outside of a couple games here and there, whenever they played against a real quarterback, it kind of exposed them a little bit. And I'm not saying Gus Bradley is all of a sudden perfect against these top quarterbacks. We saw what Mahomes did to that Raiders defense last year, but I think it was time for something different. Bring in more, not really like a more aggressive coach, but more of a coach who's going to run a little bit more man, even if it is in those cover 3, single high looks and stuff like that.
Mm-hmm.
A coach who's going to let the linebackers be the athletic linebackers they are, especially in coverage, who's going to get the most out of the defensive line. So I think that they were just kind of going for that change there. So I think there will be some marrying of that scheme. And like a guy like Darius Leonard is so interesting because I don't know how he fits in a Gus Bradley scheme with his ability in coverage.
Yeah.
He's a great reaction linebacker who reads quarterbacks well and jumps routes, but he's not a Gus Bradley type of linebacker where he can turn his back to the quarterback and take guys in man coverage and stuff like
Right.
that. So I'm really fascinated to see what he's going to do. So I think there will be some marrying of scheme there. But jeez, did you hear that?
Yeah, was that thunder?
That was thunder. Yeah, holy shit.
Oh my god.
I thought someone was getting shot outside my house for a second. I was like, oh man.
Yeah, wow, that was
that was intense. See, even the clouds don't like me talking.
We're keeping that.
Yeah, the clouds don't even let me talking bad about Shaquille Leonard. Sorry, I think
those are the.
Yeah, dude. Like even the sky.
That was actually Colts fans outside of your window saying, "How dare you talk trash?" About
yeah. But just to finish my thought there.
Oh man,
I think Shaquille Leonard. That's a player and part of the scheme. We're gonna have to marry those two a little bit because Shaquille Leonard and Matt Eberflus's scheme was a perfect fit. So you got to see how you can kind of use him in this Gus Bradley here. So I think it'll be a little bit of marrying, but it's going to be the Gus Bradley defense. And honestly, I'm not as low on Gus Bradley's style of defense as I know a lot of analytics people are. I know a lot of people get crazy with saying, oh, he's just a cover 3 guy now in a quarters type of league. But I think there's some good in that scheme.
Yeah, especially the stunts he's going to bring up front. I was really impressed by what he did with the Raiders front. And that should help the pass rush for sure. What about Matt Ryan? Have you gone back and kind of dove into him last year too much, or are you just kind of wait and see with him?
Yeah, Matt Ryan, that whole Falcons team was so interesting because through about 10 weeks, they were not a good team, but they were like fine. You know, like through like 10 weeks last year, they weren't this like absolute train wreck of a team. Matt Ryan had a really strong stretch, I think, from like I want to say it was like week 4 to week 10 or something like that, or week 4 to week 9. He had a great games against like New Orleans, Miami, some decent defenses, in there. And then the wheels fell off for that entire team last year. Like around week 10, like Cordell Patterson went from being this anomaly at running back to just being like nothing. Calvin Ridley's out for the year. Kyle Pitts was still awesome, but that whole team just kind of fell apart. But when I'm watching Matt Ryan, I'm watching him through the lens of, oh, can this be 2020 Phillip Rivers for the Colts? Can this be that veteran quarterback who maybe isn't what he was in his prime, but a productive quarterback? And honestly, I came away thinking this could be better than 2020 Rivers. I think Ryan has a much better arm than what Rivers did going into 2020. And I say this with all the love of the world to Rivers. Rivers was awesome in 2020. Really, really fun quarterback. But I think Matt Ryan has a better arm. I think he's a little more agile and more athletic. And I think that he can do all the things that Frank Reich wants out of his quarterback. I mean, Matt Ryan is such a perfect fit for Frank Reich's scheme, especially compared to what they had last year with Carson Wentz, where Carson Wentz wants everything outside the hashes. He wants everything deep. He wants to make the hero play. Matt Ryan will take those mesh concepts, those high-lows, those triangle reads on the inside and really operate well in this offense, unlike, Carson Wentz did for a lot of last year.
Yeah, I agree. I think Ryan has a higher, certainly ceiling, but probably also floor than what Rivers did coming in. I'm pretty optimistic. I mean, I'm going to have him ranked 10th in my power rankings, and a big part of that is Matt Ryan. I think, like he fits everything, like you said, he fits it perfectly. Who's been the hype guys this year for training camp, and are you buying into those hype guys?
Training camp's always so tough because it's just so vanilla. Just I don't try to get too much into the excitement. We were just talking a little off air about preseason stuff and all that, how I just hate the preseason and all that stuff there. But I will say, last year a lot of us Colts like writers and people around the team were telling like fantasy football dudes, like, make sure you're taking Jonathan Taylor because this is the most that Frank Reich has ever been like, we're going to feed a running back. And obviously I didn't expect him to be what he was, but I mean, he got fed the whole year and look what happened. Kind of like obviously not in the same vein by any means, but kind of the guy that we're getting a lot of like every single day. It's the same thing. It's Nyheim Hines, this year. I think, I know like fantasy people, for instance, have been burned by him in the past and such, but whenever he's with, I don't want to lump in Carson Wentz with Jacoby Brissett, but whenever he's with a good quarterback, an efficient, like underneath quarterback, Andrew Luck and Phillip Rivers, he had over 60 catches both of those seasons. He was very productive in the passing game. He's now he's a running
Hmm.
back that's averaging well over 4 yards a carry. Unlike early in his career, he was like a 3.8 type guy. So he's running the ball well. He's going to be involved in the running game. But honestly, they're running him at receiver a lot here in camp. Like a lot of wide
Yeah.
receiver looks. They're putting him in the slot. They're putting him outside. Last year, he had his most snaps ever at wide receiver, and that's only going to go up this upcoming season. So I think he's going to be super involved in the offense. And the Colts really aren't hiding that, their offense is going to run through three playmakers, and it's Michael Pittman Jr., Jonathan Taylor, and then Nyheim Hines. And the other guys behind that are wild cards, but those are their three. That's like their big three playmakers that they want to run the offense through. So, it might just be training camp buzz, but I'm buying the Nyheim Hines stock.
Yeah. I mean, if anything happens to Campbell again, which
Yeah.
is a small if, like like Hines is your best slot, like by far. So that's definitely something to keep an eye on. Something I hadn't really thought about. Let's talk a little bit about the offensive line. I want to talk about the left tackle position. It looks like Matt Pryor's kind of good to go there. They obviously spent the 3rd-round pick on Bernard Raymond that most people thought was a pretty good bargain there. But that's not the only question on the O-line either. You also have, some, not just some, you have a really good player to replace at right guard and Mark Lewinsky. So how do you feel about those two positions and who's going to be there and how you think those guys will turn out?
Yeah, those camp battles seem like they're pretty much decided right now. Matt Pryor is most likely going to be the left tackle, and then it looks like Danny Pinter is pretty solidified there at right guard. Pinter, just to start kind of quickly on him, I mean, he's a super athletic guy who's been playing on the interior now for this is his 3rd year with the Colts. They moved him inside right away when they drafted him, and we're pretty excited about him. I mean, he's a freak athlete, strong player who's played really well in limited snaps, so I think he's going to be fine there. But at left tackle, it's super interesting because, a lot of people, I mean, myself included, were pretty high on Bernard Ryman coming out of this draft. And he's not like this 20-year-old tackle that you want to develop. He's turning 25 to start the season. But I do think they're going to take a little bit slower approach with him. They're not going to rush him out there. He has kind of been up and down in camp. So while that's been happening, Matt Pryor has been very solid. Matt Pryor's a complete opposite player of Bernard Ryman, though. Ryman, you got your like kind of more slender, athletic, short arm guy. Matt Pryor is this behemoth with arms that touch the ground. So he's just the complete opposite.
Yeah,
But Pryor played well last year. He played I think 5 games at tackle.
he did.
1 at left tackle, 4 at right tackle. Held his own against Yannick Ngakoue in week 17. Played well against I want to say Odafe Owe in that Ravens game as well. So I don't know. I think he's going to be a pretty solid left tackle for them. I think it's at the very at the very least, it's going to be much, much better than Eric Fisher in the pass game. I mean, just him standing there is better than Eric Fisher in the pass game from last year.
Oof. I had to do a double take when I saw the Pryor contract because it was like $5.5 million.
Mm-hmm.
Like they think he's a solid starter. That's not just like, you'll come in and compete for a starter. That's like legit money.
Yeah.
So yeah, I think he's definitely like a breakout candidate, so to speak, kind of similar to like Jordan Mailata in a lot of ways for the Colts. So not quite as athletic, but similar kind of breadth. So yeah, I trust those guys with O-line. I really do. So I've had my criticisms of them at key positions, but with line, I think that's definitely they've had a good hit right there. So what about at strong safety? Has it been Nick Cross ever since Willis retired, or are they going a different route there?
Yeah, no, I think it's going to be Nick Cross. I mean, Rodney McLeod is going to rotate in a lot, and you want to have and the Gus Bradley scheme, a lot of safeties are going to play. They had a lot of safeties play this past year. It's a heavy rotation. Just you'll have some looks where there's 3 safeties on the field, but Nick Cross is going to be such a great fit at strong safety. I know that you and I joked on Twitter not too long ago where I was like, oh, it's like the better version of Jonathan Abram. And you hated that because Jonathan Abram's not very good. But
I was like, don't insult Nick Cross like that.
Right. I think my takeaway is I was watching so much Raiders defense. Jonathan Abram was great around the line of scrimmage. Awesome around the line of scrimmage. It's just anything in coverage, it was not good at all. Like just a train wreck. Nick Cross can be as good as Abram in the box and around the line of scrimmage while also being a player capable of performing in coverage. So I'm very high on Nick Cross. I had like a round 2 grade on him, and I know the Colts did as well. That's why they traded a future pick to move up and get him. And yeah, I think he's going to take this job pretty early and often and just kind of run with it for the next, hopefully the next decade plus, but definitely for this upcoming season.
Yeah, he was such a fascinating prospect where you just kind of knew there was so much more that could be tapped into with him than how he was used in college.
Right.
And he's definitely a guy that could just burst onto the scene. Kind of familiar to like Jeremy Chin, like
Yeah.
a couple years ago in a lot of ways.
Yep.
So I like Kari Willis, but very excited to see Nick Cross's game get sped up because I thought it was going to be a year until we really saw him. So yeah, we've kind of talked about a lot of stuff that might be your answer to this question already, but if you've got $25 to bet on one Colts player to have a big breakout season, who would it be?
It's funny. I think I said the same name last
And
year.
let's go non-rookie.
Yeah.
Unless you
I think last year
Okay,
I said
so
a rookie.
non-rookie.
I think I said a rookie last year. So, and I think I said the same exact name. So I'm going to say him again, but I'm very, very confident this time. I think Kwity Paye is the guy. I think it's when you look at everything this offseason, when you look at the change in philosophy on that defensive line, where he's going to be the Max Crosby of this defense. Not saying he's going to be as good as Max Crosby. Max Crosby is awesome, but he's going to be in that exact role that Crosby was in last year. And he's going to be asked to do a lot of the same things. He's had a really strong offseason. He's worked all offseason with guys like DeForest Buckner, multiple D-line coaches and stuff like that. And the reviews have just been otherworldly. Gus Bradley's been raving about him. And you got to also think he's going to get a ton of just single teams. He's going to have that backside where no one's going to worry about him because you got DeForest Buckner and Yannick Ngakoue on the other side. So why am I going to worry about Kwity Paye? So I think the stars are aligning for Kwity Paye to be a 8, 9, 10 sack guy on the other side because he has all the physical ability. Now you take away some pressure from him, you get that year of development and put him in a scheme that's better fit for him. I think he's going to have a really, really strong season.
Yeah, I think the scheme aspect of it, you can't emphasize that enough because I don't know what the analytics say, but you probably agree with this having watched the Raiders D a bunch. It felt like they probably led the league in just cross stunts where you're taking the 3-tech, trying to blow up and occupy the tackle and then wrap the edge. Like Max Crosby had a lot of production on his own, but those stunts alone probably got him 40 pressures.
Oh yeah.
A few sacks.
Crosby was
they live off that.
Crosby was psychotic off the edge last year. He was so good, man. He was just screaming off the edge on everything. But they were doing a lot of stuff where it wasn't just like those tech stunts where it's to free up the end either. It was also the other way where the end would free up the tackle to go to the outside and stuff like that. Gus Bradley, a lot like Matt Eberflus, they both blitzed, I think, under 20% of the time last year. I think Bradley was all the way down at like 12%. Like it was like the lowest in the league by far. But Bradley's way more unique with how he brings pressure. And that's why the Raiders were 12th in pressures and the Colts were 31st in pressures. Now the Raiders obviously had two really good edges. The Colts just had DeForest Buckner. But that you can kind of see that big discrepancy is a lot to do with the scheme that they both employ.
Yeah. But I was going to say that Kwity is so uniquely gifted at quickness, I would say, for his size. So that's kind of the perfect skill set where you're asking him to change a lane, bring that element of power. Like I'm sure Gus Bradley is just glowing with excitement, especially when he's going from Solomon Thomas and Quentin Jefferson to DeForest Buckner as that 3-tech. It's insane.
No, and it kind of fits because Max Crosby was so good because yes, he put on all that weight and he was this 260-pound dude because after he got out of college, he was small in college, but he came to the Raiders and just put on a ton of good weight. But he was also a 6'8" 3-cone guy. He was a freaky 3-cone guy.
Right.
Kwity Paye's alleged one is 6'3", or something, or 6'4" is what he did in training or something like that. So,
it's absurd. Yeah.
So it kind of fits. I mean, it's a really good mirror, I think, of putting those two next to each other. And again, the best hope ever for Kwity is to be as good as Max Crosby, but I think that's a really good mirror to put those.
Yeah, Quiddy's never going to have a 112 pressure season because 5 edge rushers have ever done that.
Yeah.
But he can be someone that dominates and eventually gets that $26 million payday or whatever.
Yeah.
All right. Last question here is just kind of your general expectations for the season. Their Vegas over-unders 9.5. So are you going over or under that?
Yeah, I'd probably go over on that. I would say around 10, 11, maybe 12 if things align. I just think this is a good roster. I mean, you look at offense, you finally have a quarterback that fits this scheme really well. You still have, a guy who was up there for offensive player of the year at running back, a good offensive line. But on defense too, I mean, you have Pro Bowlers or all pros at every single level. DeForest Buckner, Yannick Ngakoue, Shaquille Leonard, Stephon Gilmore, Kenny Moore II. I mean, those are all like star players on defense, at the very least, really good players. So I think they have a ton of talent. They have a quarterback that can run this scheme, a quarterback that fits Frank Reich's offense. And I just think this team is, I'm not going to say they're definitely going to win the division, but I think they're well suited to finally win that AFC South under Frank Reich. I mean, they just have a lot of talent. And, I'm not going to say Super Bowl team, but I think they're going to be a team that could scare some teams come playoff time.
Yeah. Do you think they could win a Super Bowl?
All it takes is just getting there.
Or do you think it's just, yeah,
like the Bengals last year? Who would have looked at that Bengals team going into the playoffs and said, how they're going to get to the Super Bowl? Their defense forcing 30 turnovers a game in the playoffs, because that's basically what it was.
Yeah, it's true.
All it takes is just getting in the playoffs, and then you just got to get lucky and make some noise, and you can be like the Bengals, where they were just a couple plays away from winning a Super Bowl. So I'm not going to say no that they can't win one, but I do think it's more likely, they can make the playoffs, make a little bit of noise. But yeah, I mean, once you get there, it's anyone's game.
Totally. All right, man. Thank you for taking the time to come on. That's all I got. Anything you want to plug before we get out of here?
Yeah, no, if you guys are interested in any Colts content, go over there to Locked On Colts podcast. If you guys are on YouTube here, we do have a YouTube channel. I think we're closing in on 1,000 subscribers. So if you guys want to, hit the subscribe button over there, and then all the written work over at Horseshoe Huddle with Fan Nation through Sports Illustrated. That's where we do all of our training camp stuff. And I just been talking about Gus Bradley a lot recently. So you guys can learn more about why I don't hate Gus Bradley's scheme like some of these analytics guys do.
Love it, man. All right, you stay safe from those thunderstorms.
Yeah,
man.
dude, it's interrupting your good show here. I mean,
sounds wicked. No, I might just lead the whole thing with that. That was gold.
That was funny. At least put that clip out there where we're just talking and then boom.
Yeah.
That was good.
Yeah. All right, Zach, take care. Thanks for coming on.
Thanks, buddy. See ya.
So thank you everybody for watching. I really hope you enjoyed. We haven't had a deep dive here with this length in a while. So thank you for sticking around till the end. If you are still here and you have not hit that like button yet, please make sure you do that. It really helps me out. And make sure you're subscribed so you don't miss our next deep dive. And let me know in the comments down below what you think of this ranking. Did I sell you on the Colts here at 10? Am I still crazy for having them in the top 10? Let me have it. We'll see you in the comments down below. Thanks for watching. We'll see you in a few days for number 9. Peace out.